I'm bored. Let's read a book. Oh!
Compared to the high road of Recluce, or even to the lesser east-west highway, the way from Freetown to Hrisburg seemed little more than a narrow lane. Straight, but narrow. Right outside Freetown, the road had split, going north, south, and west, and I had taken the one road that had not paralleled the coast. Hard-packed clay comprised of the center of the road, perhaps as wide as a farm wagon. The years of travel had created a surface that seemed to resist the light rain, at least in the center of the roadway. Heavy ruts churned around, surrounded by the hard-packed and level central station of the highway. I had tried to unstrap my cloak from the top of my pack while riding, had almost fallen off Garlock in the process, saving myself with a desperate grab at the front edge of the saddle. He whinnied. "All right, I'm sorry." So I reined to a halt in the middle of the road, looking behind again. We had covered more than 5 k's without seeing any pursuit, and the rain was threatening to change from a fine drizzle into something heavier. As I climbed off Garlock, the insides of my legs twinged. Only after a fraction of the distance we would have to travel, my body was protesting. Not exactly a promising sign. Thrum. Overhead, the clouds began to darken, threatening more than mere drizzle. Behind the tumbled stone walls beside the road, the meadow grasses bore only a tinge of green amid the tan at the end of the season. The washed brown of the long, scraggly blades at the base of the wall testified to more than casual rain, as did the puddles in the middle of the unmowed field beyond. At the base of some of the grasses were blackened stalks, showing rot from the continual rain. The stone outcroppings, even in the middle of the fields, the shorter grasses on the other side of the wall, and occasional breaks in the walls, the trampled hoof prints leading toward the road from one wall break to another, all pointed toward the fields as sheep or cattle pasture. I had seen neither, unless a few grayish blurs to the south were scattered sheep or goats. Thrum, thrum, splat, splat. The cold raindrops on my head prompted me to complete my recovery of the cloak and to replace the pack behind the saddle. My legs twinged again as I climbed back onto Garlock. "Let's go," he whinnied again. Thrum, thrum, splat, splat. Things were going just wonderfully. After being assaulted, threatened by a city guard, and having to flee, we were now headed through a cold and miserable rain to a town I knew nothing about, on the way through more towns about which I also knew nothing, in order to reach and cross 2 mountain ranges I had no great desire to reach, let alone cross. Whinny. Ahead, a shapeless lump appeared on the road, resolving itself into a coach drawn by a pair of huge horses. From a short pole beside the driver, who was covered from head to foot with hooded and a shiny gray slicker, drooped a reddish flag. I looked for the less muddy side of the road and nudged Garlock toward the right onto a patch of grass that rose above the churned ridge mud. Crack! A chill accompanied the coach, almost like a cold wind that blew softer yet colder as it appeared. Crack! The hoarseness of the mechanical nature of the coachman's call twisted every nerve in my spine as the coach rumbled along the lever of the road toward me. The coach itself was of polished white oak, varnished heavily until it was nearly gold, supported not by iron springs, but by heavy leather straps. Even the axles and wheels were totally of wood. Yet the coach's workmanship could not be obscured by the mud streaks upon the wood or by the mist and the water droplets which sprayed from it on its headlong journey toward Freetown. The coachman never looked aside as he drove past. Behind the coach rode two men, seated side by side on chargers that mirrored the chestnut gelding I had seen at Philshar's. All the horses moved at a quick trot, as fast as seemed possible for a longer trip. Both soldiers wore the shiny gray slickers like the coachman's, but shorter, more like jackets that allowed them to use either their white lances secured in holders like the battered lance cup which hold my shorter staff, or the white scabbarded swords they wore. The soldier closest to me glanced from under the hood, but his scrutiny was mechanical, as though he had not ever really seen me, or as though he had seen a figure and passed the information as he watched, although his mouth did not appear to open. For the moment, all that happened was the coach passed. Midday seemed more like a stormy night. Then all that remained was a dissipating sense of disorder, the soft rumble of the wheels fading away, and a hoarse I shook myself and clutched the reins, hoping that Isolde had completed whatever she had to do and had found the black ship that doubtless waited unseen somewhere near the harbor. Tamra, I hoped her procrastination hadn't left her open to the chaos wizard that had ridden in the white oak coach. But there wasn't much I could do. Not then. I swallowed, wiped the water off my forehead, and watched the road, noting absently that the coach's passage had left only the faintest of indentations on the road. Splat, splat. Cold rain gusted in icy drops from an ever darker sky, and I looked for some sort of shelter. But the road stretched straight ahead, level, for at least another 5 k's, bordered by the same tumbled stone fences, and the same withered grasses, and the same distant and scattered sheep. Not one house nor homestead had I seen since crossing that first hill outside Freetown. Yet the sheep indicated that someone lived somewhere, and that said no one wanted to be close to the road I traveled. I shivered again. Another whinny came from Gerlach as he tossed his head, and droplets flew back onto my cloak and face. I know, it's cold and wet, but there's no place to stop. He gave another whinny. No place, nowhere. So we kept plodding along the road. No wagons, no more coaches, and a steady beating flow of water from overhead. Finally, when my cloak was nearly soaked through, its treated leather heavy on my shoulders, we reached the first low hill at the end of the near-deserted meadow valley. By then, the rain had eased to a mere chilling mist. Some scattered pines bordered the road, and the stone walls lapsed into tumbled low piles of rock. On the hilltop, more of a hillock, really, sat another pile of stones, the remnants of what had clearly been an extensive farm or estate. There was no immediate sense of chaos or disorder, only a feeling of age, and maybe under it all some sadness. Although my father, Kerwin, and Talrin would all have assailed me for ascribing an emotion to description of order or its lack thereof. At least Gerlach couldn't comment on sloppy logic. From that second hill, the terrain became less ordered and more wild, with hills covering mainly with pines, although a few gray oaks, their leaves turning yellow-brown, were scattered along the lower reaches of the hills, especially near the few permanent streams. While there were countless brooks and streams filling with rainwater, only one even approached, looking like it had a permanent cut channel. Again, I shivered. Whatever it was, as miserably normal as the rain and the surroundings seemed, the cause of the rain was not precisely natural. Why, I couldn't say, but that the extent of the rain was unnatural was clear, even while I could detect no sign of chaos. The water was natural. Gerlach enjoyed lapping it up from several of the brooks, but when I stopped to let him graze, he did not seem particularly interested in the straggly grass. So I pulled myself back into the saddle and finished munching on the travel bread I had brought from the Traveler's Rest. The other unnatural thing was the road itself, which ran straight where it could and curved gently when it could not, and climbed gradually if neither straightness nor curves were possible. Once Gerlach and I had passed through the lower hills. In the higher hills the road seemed narrowed not to a jot, nor did the grade steepen. The sides of the hills seemed planed away at a gentle angle, without the overhanging boulders or outcrops I half expected to see. In time, I almost struck my forehead. Wizard's Road, of course. Magistra Tirana had mentioned that there were some in Kandar, but I hadn't paid much attention to the details. She was even more boring than Talrin. A whinny came from Gerlach. While I wasn't that good at extending my senses, particularly in the rain, once I realized what might be there, I could almost feel the hard white stone pavement under the packed clay. I shook my head as the light dimmed, and Gerlach plodded downhill toward a few scattered lights that the intermittent stone posts had led me to believe that might be Hrisgarg. 3 or 4 k's short of the town, the road forked, and a narrow, large, roughly chiseled into a stone post, twice the size of most distant stones, pointed down the right-hand branch. Above the arrow were the letters H, S, B, G. The left-hand road continued straight, without lights or dwellings nearby, toward the next line of hills. Only a line of coach tracks indicated that the road was ever used. After the turn, the remainder of the route to Hrisbarg was churned, muddy, and in parts required near fording of the streamlets that meandered across the excuse for a road that we traveled. I almost wish we had stayed with the Wizard's Road, gloomy as it was, that had arrowed straight into the hills, especially after it began to rain again. The cold pelting flow quickly re-soaked my cloak. Another whinny came from Gerlach. I agree, but do we really have any options? Gerlach was silent on that point. The first huts we came to were roofless, dark, and deserted. Then came huts with roofs, if apparently deserted. Finally, Gerlach set his hooves on the thoroughly churned mud of central Hrisbarg. The main street in Hrisbarg seemed to consist of equal sections of puddles and mud, instead of stone pavement, or even stone walks with storm drains. They used mud. The stores were fronted with raised plank walkways. Some had posts and steps for trying carriage horses or single horses, but most just had plain planks slapped down. Even in the drizzle, I could see the woodwork of those walks was abysmal green wood, rough striking not even rudimentary effort to keep the walking surface level. Gerlach shook his head and consequently his mane, spraying pony-scented water all over my cloak and face. The cloak was designed for it. My face, it wasn't. My obvious belt pouch had several silvers remaining, enough for a night at an inn and a stable for Gerlach, particularly after the day we had completed and the kind of night it was turning out to be. 1 or 2 stores had oil lamps in front, but Hrisbarg lacked street lamps as such. Even with my excellent night vision, I was having trouble. What's with the drizzle and the strangeness of Kandar? Another sound of disgust from Gerlach, and another finer spray of water flipped across me. All right, we'll try to find an inn or something. I began to look in earnest, although I'd kept my eyes open for signs of the road to Hewlett. The Brotherhood had been singularly unhelpful with the directions that I needed to spend a full year in Kandar and pass through Hewlett to the cities beyond. After all, was my danger geld just to spend time in Kandar and pass through Hrisbarg and Hewlett and get to the Westthorns? Not bloody likely. If they hadn't been so deadly serious, it could have been a joke. And once again, no one told me anything I couldn't figure out first, except why Tolerant had been so insistent on getting me to Westhorns. Down a lane to my left, I saw a faded sign with what looked like an H and some sort of howling creature. Outside of a few dark buildings in the corner and some small cottages huddled further down the road. I could see nothing, nor did I feel anything. Certainly no inns, roadhouses. So I kept Gerlach headed toward the far end of Hrisbarg. The sign said the Silver Horse, predictably, since apparently no one in Kandar besides the merchants and the clergy could read. Under the letters was a horse, badly painted, with flaking silver paint that looked gray in the rain. With the chuck of the reins, I nudged Gerlach toward the slope-roofed and weathered building next to the inn. My legs almost collapsed under my full weight. Sir? Standing there was a stable boy not much taller than my elbow. Do I pay you or the inn? It's 3 pence a night with 5 with a separate stall, oats, and a full manager. I handed him a penny before I touched the rolled-up pack. That's for you to take special care of my horse. Yes, sir. The youngster stepped back. Which stall? You could have the one under the eaves there. I got the message. If I took the one with a low headroom, none of the bully boys with the big horses would bother him. And Gerlach didn't need extra space as much as being left to rest and feed. That's fine. I led Gerlach there myself, letting the dark-haired youngster open the half door, as much to keep him away from the staff that could have been a lance in the dim light of the single covered tin lamp that hung from the beam by the doorway. Even after staring to unstartle Gerlach, I removed the staff and tucked it under the straw by the outside wall. No one but someone attuned to order/chaos forces would notice it, and it wouldn't be that much good to me against an accomplished chaos master anyway. I can help you, offered the boy. I didn't protest as he unstrapped the saddle, since Gerlach didn't seem to mind, merely whuffing and shaking his head. Besides, the youngster's hands were far more defter than mine, and my legs were still shaking. With Gerlach mainly settled, and the saddle and blanket wrapped dry, I was ready to try the silver horse itself. My leg muscles spasmed as I limped across the muddy courtyard to the inn. Faint light glimmered through a small, leaded window panes facing the stable. The open outer door was of rough pine, covered with peeling white paint. The inner door, which I checked as I pushed it open, was of good red oak, but the varnish was worn and cracking, and the hinges had been reset too many times. It took some time for me to wipe all the mud off my boots, using the worn rush mats. But I managed, not that it mattered much. The floor was scarred and stained wood, with dirt heaps in the corners. Inside, only one of the lamps in the narrow hall was lit, and it smoked and flickered. "Hello, the inn?" A muffled voice answered from somewhere. "Coming at this hour?" questioned another voice, sharper than the first, and nearer. Waiting, I looked around the inn. On my right, through a square opening the size of a double door, was the dining area, and the faint glow of coals glinted from the stone fireplace. On the left, I noted a small sitting area with 3 wooden benches covered with oblong cushions. A second wall lamp, damp and low, illuminated the sitting area. The bench backs were spooled and unpadded. In the center of the benches stood a battered low wooden table, used primarily as a boot rest, as if the indentations on the table edge were any indication. As in Freetown and on the road, travelers seemed few indeed. Yes, the voice was the sharp one that belonged to a waspish lady dressed in a faded brown dress and a stained yellow apron. Her face was clean, if angular, and her silver-streaked hair formed a neat bun at the back of her head. "How much for a room and some supper?" My voice was hoarse, rough from the wet and cold. Her eyes raked over me. "A silver a night." She paused, and the dark vulture eyes took in my silk cloak. "Paid in advance. That includes bread and cheese in the morning. Dinner is extra. What's available on the bill of fare?" "Not much is left tonight." After fumbling with the obvious front porch, I produced a silver and 5 coppers, for me and for my horse. Part of the vulture look vanished as she took the coins. "You rode in this weather?" It seemed like a good idea when I started. Freetown wasn't a place I wanted to stay, and there wasn't any place to stop, and I shrugged. The woman glanced at the door, then back to me. "Hrisbarg is part of the duchy, and Major Duraville likes to stop here." I got the message. Travelers don't always know the local weather, madam, and I was just hoping for a warm inn and hot food. "We can help there. Just go in and sit down. Annalise will see you shortly, unless you want to see your room first." "I think I'd like to see a room, at least to lay out the cloak and dry out. Clean towel and basin or another copper?" "2 towels with fresh water in the morning," I countered. She smiled. "In advance." So I paid another penny, wondering if I could have asked for a chit, but deciding against it. The towels were thick and clean, both of them, if a shade gray, and the basin held clean, lukewarm water. The room itself was barely large enough to hold a sagging double bed and a battered red oak wardrobe. The bed had a single coarse sheet over an even lumpier-looking mattress, covered with a heavy brown blanket. A wall sconce had held a single scrawny candle that the thin innkeeper had lit from her lamp. The door had no lock, but with so few guests, I decided to risk my cloak and pack for the moment. When I returned to the dining area, another body sat at the table closest to the fire. A man in a dark blue uniform and a posture that was arrogant, even while slouched at the table and cradling a mug of something. I took a walk table before two men on the other side, not quite so close to the fire. Another casual look at me. The soldier took another deep swallow from the mug. "Annalise, a moment, please," returned the pleasant voice I had heard, but not seen earlier. I stretched out, enjoying the warmth of the room and beginning to feel more human and less chilled. "Thank you, Hurlet. I don't know when we'll have another customer." The blonde girl, probably not even my age, nodded to the soldier. But she ignored him and walked straight to my table, long brawn blades swinging at her shoulders. "Good evening, sir. I'm afraid that the larder is a little low tonight. We still have some bear stew and a pair of chops, I think, wheat or cornbread, and stewed spice apples. Also some white cheese." The open smile displayed strong, if uneven, white teeth. The open low collar of the peasant blouse showed some of her other strong features, especially as close as she stood. "Which is better, the chops or stew?" "The stew," called Hurlet. "Take the stew. Those chops have been heated every night for a week. Get me another mug, Annalise." Annalise raised her eyebrows, then nodded faintly. "I'll try the stew, cheese, apples, and a few slices of wheat bread. What is there to drink?" "Mulled cider, hard beer, Largo wine, and red berry." "Red berry. Real drinker you got there, Annalise. Real manly fellow." Annalise shrugged as if to dismiss the soldier. Then she grinned. "Would you like anything else?" "Not right now, thank you." I managed not to grin back at her, but she had asked. Before turning from me, she wiped an expression from her face. Then she retrieved the mug from the soldier. "Another hard beer?" "What else?" "That's all you'll ever provide, and I still have to pay for it." The bearded man stared at the five as tentative flames hissed over a pair of green logs. Annalise disappeared through an open door into what I took to be the kitchen, reappearing with two mugs almost without leaving my sight. Thump. Hurley's mug arrived without a word from the girl. "Here you are, sir." My mug came with a plate that held cheese and wheat bread. "Are you from Hewlett, Eagle's Nest, or Freetown?" "I guess I'd have to say not any of them. Came down the coast road and decided not to stay in Freetown with all the rain and gloom. They told me there are no ships anyway." The soldier relaxed fractionally, and the girl nodded. "It's a long ride." I grinned. "It's a cold ride." Then I sipped the red berry, breaking off some cheese to go with a chunk of the wheat bread. As I ate, forcing myself to take each bite slowly, she withdrew to the kitchen, and the soldier retreated into his mug. "Sir?" An enormous streaming bowl appeared in front of me, accompanied by a small plate of spiced apples and sliced red apples. Both dishes were heavy earthenware, with fine cracks of age radiating through the glaze. Hurlet had been right about the stew, though. It was spicy, hot, and tasty. But I pushed back the bowl before I finished it, knowing that to eat any more would leave me ill, and then some. "Will there be anything else?" I glanced over the soldier, slumped face down at the table. "Later?" I asked, testing her earlier grin. She shrugged but did not smile. How much? 5 or half silver. After draining the red berry, I gave her a silver and got back 5 coppers, one of which went to her and into her belt before she went into the kitchen. With a regretful look backward, I climbed the creaking stairs to my room, checking my pack immediately once I had closed the door. Nothing had been touched. Even as I struggled out of my trousers, I wondered if Annalise had really meant anything by that nod. She hadn't, or at least I collapsed into sleep with no gentle tapping on my door or other interruptions. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this, please like, comment, and subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss out on any of these videos. See y'all in the next one. Goodbye!